Only God Forgives was directed by Danish filmmaker Nicolas Winding Refn and stars Ryan Gosling as Julian, a man of few words who seeks revenge for his brother's recent death on the behalf of his dominating mother. It was released in 2013 and was heavily criticized for its slow pace, brutal violence, and questionable morality. It was eventually forgotten about as merely an empty and unnecessarily violent exercise in style over substance, having received little to no re-evaluation from audiences today. This film seemingly doesn't exist. I don't think it comes as a surprise, considering the topic of this video, that I absolutely love Only God Forgives. To be fair, I prefer Nicolas Winding Refn's previous film Drive, and I can understand why someone could easily misinterpret its intentions. But that's why I'm here, to give you my interpretation of what Nicolas Winding Refn was going for and explain why I love this film as much as I do. Firstly, I would like to talk about my experience with this filmmaker. The first movie of his that I ever watched was Drive, also starring Ryan Gosling, and I was absolutely mesmerized by it. I highly recommend you watch Drive, especially before watching Only God Forgives, because they both share a similar approach to their storytelling, but I believe Drive does it in a way that is more widely accessible. I later watched Only God Forgives, Fear X, and his Netflix series Copenhagen Cowboy, and I continued to fall in love with his direction. By the way, Fear X is also a movie that I find highly misjudged, and it's also one that I would like to make a similar video about in the future. Back to Only God Forgives, it is one of the most visually beautiful films I've probably ever seen. The entire thing is photographed ridiculously well, making the criminal underworld of Bangkok look like a Dutch whorehouse. I believe this was deliberate for a very specific reason. Nicolas Winding Refn has referred to himself as a pornographer, fetishizing brutality and finding elegance in it. This didn't cause as much controversy in Drive, since the film used sudden outbursts of extreme violence as a character trait, a way to indirectly explore the driver's haunted past. In Only God Forgives, the violent acts committed by the cop character seem pointless and unnecessarily graphic. But are they? I should point out here that I am very often bothered by cinematic violence when it's not handled in a tasteful way. What I mean by that is, if a film justifies its inclusion of extreme violence and makes it a part of its thematic content, then I'm more than okay with it. But when a filmmaker includes graphic violence in a way to either get a reaction, to make a film supposedly more entertaining, or just plainly shows it without any particular reasons, then it actually detracts from my enjoyment of the picture. But once again, this is not the case with Only God Forgives. Spoiler warning. The plot of the film revolves around Julian. He is a silent drug smuggler who is potentially dealing with the Oedipus complex, which basically refers to a son's sexual attitude towards his mother. Julian's mother, Crystal, played by Kristen Scott Thomas, compels him to find and kill the one responsible for his brother's recent death. All the while, we follow a dirty cop named Chang, who is graphically torturing and viciously killing people left and right, becoming more involved in the main narrative later in the movie. Okay, let's finally get to the nitty-gritty. Chang represents God in this film. This is barely a theory, since Nicolas Winding Refn was literally whispering to the actor's ear, "You are God," as a form of guidance. I was initially very skeptical of this. Chang is surely a character who has the ultimate power, being controlled by no one and deciding someone's fate according to his own personal judgment. We see him torturing and killing criminals, seemingly punishing them for their sins instead of helping them to overcome them. But God isn't a punisher, is he? In the beginning of the film, we see a statue that is later shown again during the fight between Julian and Chang. This statue is one of the keys to this film. I'm not sure in what way exactly, but it is. Notice how much the director emphasizes on hands throughout the entire picture. Chang even cuts off Julian's hands in the end. Hands represent sin. Chang isn't cutting off the hands of sinners as an act of punishment, but as an act of forgiveness. That's why Chang represents God, harkening back to the title of the film, Only God Forgives. Another part that left many people scratching their heads, myself included, was the scene where Julian cuts open his dead mother's stomach and sticks his hand in it. Apparently, quote, it was Ryan Gosling's idea to open the stomach of Julian's dead mother. He had it after writer and director Nicholas Winding Refn asked him if he'd rather smile or cry after Julian's mom's death. He replied that he'd open her uterus to see what's inside, unquote. I believe it's supposed to be a metaphor for crawling back into the womb, as Julian is so infatuated with his mother and owes his deeply disturbed nature, including his guilt and repressed sexuality, to her. When it comes to the acting, Kristin Scott Thomas gives my favorite performance in this entire film. The characters here feel more like archetypes rather than real people. Kristin Scott Thomas delivering a purposefully hammy and over-the-top performance that I actually thought was excellent. Ryan Gosling's performance, on the other hand, being fine for what his character is supposed to be, but ultimately lacking in depth when compared to his equally subdued but considerably more emotionally complex work in Drive. In the end, Only God Forgives is a meditative, layered, and mesmerizing film. The visuals are absolutely stunning, the action sequences are brilliantly directed, the score has a really cool electronic synth flavor to it, and the way that the subtext was ultimately visualized deeply resonated with me. If you have not watched this film, then why are you still watching this video? I strongly recommend it, but I must warn you that it's not for the faint of heart. If you're a fan of Drive, then you'll love Only God Forgives.